when I graduated from college. I was a psychology technician, and they trained me really, really well on how to detect a person that has suicide tendencies. In fact, I lost a guy when I worked in that job from an apparent suicide. So you come to a survival skills specialist, a bachelor's degree in psychology, master's in human relations, PhD in psychology, served in the Army for 3 years, worked for the Department of the Army as a civilian for 28 years, and you're going to come to my house and say my 19-year-old daughter jumped up all of a sudden and decided to commit suicide. The whole atmosphere or scenario doesn't match a suicide person. So I started getting messages from Iraq right off the bat. In fact, the Washington Post reported LaVena's death as a mysterious gunshot wound to the head. Then I started getting messages out of Iraq that the Army had lied. LaVena did not commit suicide. And when this started to happen, now you got the Army on the defensive, so they got to come up with a reason why she committed suicide. So they're going to say she was sexually active. She came down with a sexually transmitted disease, got depressed over it, and killed herself. So that was bad enough. When they sent me pictures, black and white pictures of the crime scene and at the autopsy center, so they were obviously trying to hide the blood splash patterns and all this other stuff that goes with a homicide. But I launched a preliminary investigation. I called some people and asked them if they knew somebody that was in Iraq to let me know what they could tell me. I had a friend of mine who was a police officer. He got a message that she was found dead, shot in the head in a contractor's tent. He was on his way. He called me. He was on his way over here. He never made it. He had a heart attack. But his wife told me what his message was. The second message that we got was that a female sergeant found her body that was located close to a jogging area. They said the cafeteria. That's what they said. The third one was that she was found dead in a tent that was off limits to military personnel. So here's what I ended up explaining to a investigator that I met in Lacey Clay's office, and I'm thinking the date was like the 19th of July, and I think it was in 2007. Lacey Clay allowed me to use his office, and 5 people came to that meeting. Ed Reedy was the medical examiner who said he said, according to the information he received, it was a suicide. He never said it was a homicide. He said the criminal investigator said it. We had a Special Agent Hughes. Now, I don't know if people remember the movie The General's Daughter. Do you remember that movie?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That was with. Is that the Pat Tillman story?
No, that Pat Tillman is the different scenario. This was a movie where a general's daughter was found dead, and they sent a special investigator. John Travolta was that person, by the way, to Iraq to investigate the general's daughter.
Yeah, I remember.
Army did. Yeah, okay. I got several people sent me that tape, but anyway,
Welcome to the King Ya podcast. As you may have guessed, I am your host, King Ya, a father, activist, and professional speaker. On this podcast, we discuss relationships, criminal justice, news and politics, Black history, culture, and domestic violence awareness. If this is your first time being here, I want to say thank you and encourage you to keep listening. Each week you can expect to hear thought-provoking interviews as well as personal relationship tips that would help enhance your life. You will have access to resourceful downloads that you can implement daily to become more productive. Thank you for spending some time with me today. Follow me on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter, KingYa2020. My podcasts are also available on iHeartRadio, Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, Anchor, TuneIn, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Just look for King Ya. The purpose of this podcast is because everyday people inspire me through their stories of trial and error in life. Now let's jump into your favorite podcast. What better way to share our stories?
Are going to be going to the phone lines in just a few moments. We'll be bringing Dr. John Johnson on. It's a 2-hour show, so you guys are in for a powerful, powerful story. It's a heart-wrenching story. Every single day, the family is forced to relive this moment over and over again of an unsolved mystery and silent truth of their daughter, LaVena Lynn Johnson. So we'll be getting into it. The phone lines, I will also open the phone lines up for you guys as well to ask questions. So we will do some intermissions, and you guys will have an opportunity to ask some questions as well. With no further ado, we're going to bring on Dr. Johnson. All right. Dr. Johnson, are you with us?
I am, and thank you.
Hey, Dr. Johnson, thank you. It's a pleasure, my brother. I'm unfortunately under these circumstances. However, it's a pleasure to hear your voice, sir, and to be hearing this story again. Where do you want to start, my friend?
Yeah, well, technically, our story started at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. When LaVena got there, that's when she was told she was headed to Iraq after being guaranteed by her recruiter that she wouldn't have to go. But what happened after she got there, she found out she was going to Iraq, and she and I think it was 8 women. It was a even number. Either it was 6 or 8, and they were supposed to have gotten 8 days leave, according to what LaVena told me on the phone, which was the 17th of July in 2005. That was a Sunday morning. Apparently, somebody messed up the paperwork, and they only got 4 days. One of the white parents, from what I understand from LaVena, went to her congressman and raised hell about the fact her daughter didn't know she was going to Iraq till she got to Fort Campbell, and that they had cut her leave date from 8 days to 4. The Army ended up sending that young lady to Germany, so that made LaVena an oddball. LaVena, she like me in so many ways. She's very outspoken. So she went to, I don't know who in the leadership there, and told them that they were treating her differently because she didn't have a battle buddy, and her battle buddy was sent to Germany. Fort Campbell requested from the Army, according to what LaVena told us, they wanted to keep her at Fort Campbell to act as part of their recruiting team. Apparently, when they told the general, and I'm going to mention his name in a moment, over in Iraq, that LaVena they trying to keep her at Fort Campbell, he insisted that she come over to Iraq. So here you have LaVena, oddball, 19 years old, being sent to Iraq, where they got all these different genealogy of males. In addition to that, they had already had some accusations of rape and murder. Of course, I found this out after the fact. But when she got there, she was doing her job by herself. She was opening up and locking up the communications center. She was talking about how she would get off from work and run home. Whenever she went to take a shower, she made sure she looked around and didn't see anybody there, and so she went and took a shower. So I was terrified. So I talked to her on the 14th and asked her how was it. Apparently, when she went to close the center, the males wouldn't leave. So she said the general came in and made them leave out of the communication center. So my question was, why the hell is a general in a communications center with EMs, enlisted people, enlisted men and women? He told LaVena the reason they didn't leave because her voice was too soft. I didn't like that. So 3 days later, back to the 17th, I talked to my daughter, and you got the Army, first of all, guilty of gross neglect. You endangered her life. What the heck did you think was going to happen to her over there by herself with all those, genealogies of males? Apparently they didn't care. And so 6 weeks after she was in Iraq, she was found dead. And the Army sent, Donald Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of Defense at that time, didn't want any of his officers attached to this case. So he sent a staff sergeant from Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, to my home to deliver the message that LaVena died of a self-inflicted wound, which is euphemism for suicide. I don't think they thought they were going to get a challenge from me, but I had just talked to my daughter. In addition to that, the Army, I worked for them as a civilian when I graduated from college. I was a psychology technician, and they trained me really, really well on how to detect a person that has suicide tendencies. In fact, I lost a guy when I worked in that job from an apparent suicide. So you come to a survival skills specialist, a bachelor's degree in psychology, master's in human relations, PhD in psychology, served in the Army for 3 years, worked for the Department of the Army as a civilian for 28 years, and you're going to come to my house and say my 19-year-old daughter jumped up all of a sudden and decided to commit suicide. The whole atmosphere or scenario doesn't match a suicide person. So I started getting messages from Iraq right off the bat. In fact, the Washington Post reported LaVena's death as a mysterious gunshot wound to the head. Then I started getting messages out of Iraq that the Army had lied. LaVena did not commit suicide. And when this started to happen, now you got the Army on the defensive So they got to come up with a reason why